You got me on? Oh, that's even on already and everything. Can you hear me okay? Can you hear me okay? Bob can't, but that's okay. He can read my lips from there. I said, you can't hear me, but you can read my lips from there. Well, I'd like to say good morning to everybody and welcome to class. We're in Romans, and we're in the 3rd chapter. And our topic, I guess, this morning is the law of faith. We talked a little bit about the law and that kind of thing last week. Bob did. We may go over some of the same stuff, but as we get started, that's kind of where we're going to be. They didn't leave me an announcement sheet, but there'll be announcements later in service. And I've got 2 sets of stuff to get through, so we're liable not to be out of here till tonight. So, yeah, well, I don't. Bob said he could stand it if I could, and I don't know about the rest of you. So, when Paul comments about the law, and this is just going to be just a little bit, he said it's said to those who were under the law. And that makes perfect sense to me. I mean, those that are under the law are bound to the law. Those that, we'll just say in France, now they're not bound to our laws, so we know the difference in what laws are. Now there's a universal morality that, humankind pretty much as a I'm just going to say as a general rule sticks with, but those that are under the law, that's who the law is for. So our law, our law of faith, we have certain commands that as Christians, we're commanded to attend assembly. We find that in Scripture. To pray regularly. That's in there. We give in harmony to our prosperity. So we give as we've been prospered. We're commanded to win souls. We're commanded to bring up our children to serve God. And we're commanded to sing with grace in our hearts to God. Those things all sound familiar to us. But what we can say is those things aren't required of those that aren't in a covenant relationship with God. And so they're not required of those that are not entered into the covenant, because the covenant comes with stipulations, and those are part of the stipulations that we adhere to. So as far as applying those things to others, we have difficulty with that. And we're going to talk about that. But I'm going to read Romans chapter 3, verses 21 about through 26. And so, but now the righteousness of God, apart from the law, is revealed, being witnessed by the law and the prophets, even the righteousness of God through faith in Jesus Christ to all and on all who believe. For there's no difference, for all have sinned and fall short of the glory of God, being justified freely by his grace through the redemption that is in Christ Jesus, whom God set forth as a propitiation by his blood through faith to demonstrate his righteousness. Because in his forbearance God had passed over the sins that were previously committed to demonstrate at the present time his righteousness, that he might be just and the justifier of the one who has faith in Jesus. So, he's talking to, and we know in Romans, he's talking to Jewish and Gentile brethren. He's talking to those that have accepted the new law. Now, the Jewish brethren are having trouble with it, obviously, and we're going to talk about that a little bit because we have trouble also. But the Jewish brethren were having trouble with it. But of all of those, in talking to the Jewish, all of the rules and regulations and rituals and washings and fastings and all of those things that were called the law, tried to establish a method for righteousness. It was a map to righteousness. It was a shadow of the things to come as far as righteousness goes. But obviously, man's inability to keep it became the issue. And so, as we get into Romans, there's words in there that we just don't use in our vocabulary much anymore, as far as just everyday vocabulary. So there's words like redemption, righteousness, justification, holiness or sanctification, propitiation, atonement, those kind of words. You won't hear those in everyday conversation. You can't. It's hard to work one of those in every once in a while, and so. But the meaning and the essence of those words is important when we're talking about or thinking about or studying about God and who God is and how God treats His creation and treats His people, and so it's important. So there's a lot of debate over how these words are used and what they mean at the time, but the average Bible reader and this is, and I don't know that we've all been here, but I think we've all been here at some point in our walk. The average Bible reader just throws up his hands in frustration, asking, "Why even bother? Just tell me what I need to know to live my life. Yeah, I just want I want somebody to tell me exactly what I need to do, and then I'll work out a way to get around it," because that's what we do. We work around. We find a workaround. We find a loophole. We're a nation of loopholes, and so but rather than put forth the effort and the time and the study and the we would rather somebody just tell us. But in order for us to discover the meaning of our Christian life, and our Christian life has a meaning, we need to find the meaning of those words and what God has to say. Now, I said earlier that the Jewish brethren were having trouble. And I've talked in this class before about how I like to try to put myself in their place to see, I guess the main purpose is to see how I would react in their position. Okay, I come from a history of being the chosen people. Okay, and now I'm being asked to put that aside, not just what I do put aside, but who I am. I'm being asked to put that aside, and it's a difficult thing. And we have hindsight. We have 20/20 hindsight. We think that's not a difficult thing. How hard could it be? You have the truth. That's what you do, and you follow it. Okay. Well, we in the United States, when I started thinking about how to put myself in their position, okay, and this may not even be relevant, but in my mind, the United States as a country seems to be, in this particular instance that I'm going to talk about, like the Jewish brethren. Okay? Because not willing to give up all of what we had as far as the Jewish. Obviously willing to accept Jesus Christ, but not everything that goes with it apart from the law that I've grown up with, that I've known, and that's the way it is. And I put before you in the United States Bob, how far is it to your house from here?
15 miles.
15 miles. Okay. Hi. Bobby, how big is that pop that's about that big? How much is that? What in the bottle? What is that? Not how much it costs. How much is in it? 2 liters. Huh. How fast do we drive? Speed limit. 55 what? Miles per hour? Okay. How big is the engine in your car? Mark, how big is the engine in your car? No, that's not what I'm asking. What does it say? The engine in my car, 6.2 liters. Everybody else can pretty much go with that. What's the problem with that? We as Americans refuse to accept the metric system. Everybody else in the world on the metric system. Now, we pick and choose what we like. Miles per hour is going to stay. We're not going to go meters, kilometers anytime soon. We're just not, because we grew up this way. Okay? We finally have accepted in our engine displacement, rather than a 350 cubic inch or a 454 cubic inch, or we finally accepted liters. See? Yeah. Now, we have to look it up to figure out how many cubic inches is in 6.2 liters now. Okay? So we're still on the fence with that. But if you go to buy a 2-liter pop, you don't see how many ounces are in there or how many quarts or whatever. We've done that. And it's just out there, and that's the way we are. And like you said, not willing to give up those things that we know, okay? That we grew up with, that we have a history with, that we have a history of. That sometimes, and you can look at it, sets us apart, okay? As a nation, nobody else in the world goes for miles per hour when they're driving. Nobody, Now, we've eased into some of the things, like I've been in the business, and for those of you who don't know, I fix cars for a living, but I've been in long enough that my 9/16 wrench has moved all the way over to a 15 millimeter wrench, okay? My half-inch wrench is a 13 millimeter wrench. All those have changed. Fasteners and that kind of thing have changed. And so, but there are things that we won't change, okay?
John?
Yes, sir.
I got a question. If 15 millimeters and 9/16 are the same, why do I have both of them in my bottle?
That's exactly right, because they're not exactly the same. They're really close, but they're not exactly the same. Now, you will find some that are exactly the same, because as you go through the scale, close enough to exactly the same that you can use them. I use a 5/16 all the time. That's an 8 millimeter for those laymen in the group. I use a 5/16 all the time, because that's what I have that fits that particular area that I'm working on at that time. Now, I own an 8 millimeter. I own several 8 millimeters, but I grab the 5/16. So we go with what we know, okay? And so as we look into the psyche, I guess, of the Jewish brethren here at Rome, they have a lot of walls in their way of things. They have their own aversion to the metric system. So as I was thinking about that, it just seemed to fit our nation and our culture. And so as we move on, we're talking about the law, and the law has done its work. Okay? And we're talking about the Mosaic law at this point. The law has done its work. It brought humanity to the point of being desperate, in a desperate need for God. Okay? Even the life lived without the context of the law could not find favor with God based on works. Okay? And we live in a society that equates works with good. It equates works with the definition of Christian. works help us to overlook personality differences. You know, I know he's really loud, but, you know, he helps the poor people, or he helps the orphans, or he does this. He's loud and obnoxious, but he's good. Okay? And so we're willing to overlook the loud because of the good. And so works did not allow those out of the law to come under the law. But the righteousness of God, as revealed in Jesus Christ, is where this all hinges. If we look to the righteousness of God, God's being right, God, the word righteousness in the Old Testament was kind of carried with it judicial, moral, and covenant type meanings. Law courts would claim a person right, or justified, or vindicated, and that's within the bounds of the law, so in a court of law. But the moral meaning, and that's where we found ourselves, refers to someone who lives upright or in line with the covenant. Okay? Not just upright and moral, but in line and under the covenant. And a covenant is not the things we talk about all the time, but in with the covenant teaching. It carries the meaning of the one who is true to the covenant promises, but not only the covenant promises, but the stipulations that go along with that promise. The covenant is always this if. And so as we enter into a covenant with God, there's stipulations. So God and humanity require a covenant bond. It's there. And the ones that keep the covenant, the promises of that covenant, are where the trustworthy and righteous comes in. Now, there's a lot of argument over the words about whose righteousness are we talking about at each particular instance. And I would argue that it's all God's righteousness. Even the righteousness that I may exhibit in the following of the covenant or being bound by the covenant, I think that's still God's righteousness. Because we as a fallen humanity need to be right with God. That's just part of the deal.
When you really think about it, to define righteousness, God is.
You have to start with God, right? You know, you look at the example to see if you're living up to whatever the definition that God sets forth as righteous. The example that God is righteous. That's where we have to go, because we can make up our own anytime. I mean, who made up the inch? Who made up horsepower? You know, it's horsepower versus Newton meters and all of this stuff. We look to God for the definition and the example. So God expects right living. And right living is defined by Christ, in Christ, whom God sent for everyone. Okay, and this is where the wrench gets thrown in for the Jewish brethren, because we know they were who? They were the chosen people. Okay, and so if I was already chosen, do I have to be chosen again through Christ?
Actually, it's even worse than that, They were chosen. Now it's for everybody. You're not special.
Exactly. That's not fair. That's not fair. You know, why should, and my boys were that way, you know, and I just seen it because my youngest was 5 or 6 years younger than my oldest one. And it was just not fair that the oldest one got to do something that the youngest one didn't. Well, you know, my youngest is 10 years old. Oh, I can drive better than him. I don't need to drive. I want to drive. And so, you know, as a Jew at that time, you know, your mindset would be, how did they earn what I've got? How did they earn the relationship with God that I've got without going through all of those things that I've been going through since childhood? All of those rules that I had to follow since childhood. The fact that I was born into God's chosen people. I was defined as God's people. And now you're just giving it to these people that are, you know, that I've treated as my whole life as dogs and you know, not necessarily a human. How does that work? How does that compute when you're a Jewish brethren? And so,
But John was saying he was correct when
that's exactly right. That's exactly right. And we have to look at that as far as the guilt involved in being a Jew, as far as the new way. Okay? And, you know, the covenant. What happened to the covenant? Okay? They had the covenant of the circumcision. They had the covenant of the circumcision. They were trying to carry that over. Okay? That was their, you know, that was their miles per hour. You know, we'll go with the 2-liter bottle, but we're going to keep the miles per hour. Absolutely. Oh, absolutely. Hang on. Hang on.
This is interesting to give an idea of the Jewish mindset of that time. In the 90s, LaGard Smith, some of you may know him, was worshiping with the Jewish Christians, members of the church in the Jewish community in Jerusalem. And they were singing an old Jewish hymn. And in that hymn, it said, "Thank God I am not a Gentile, a woman, or a slave." Talking about a Jewish mindset.
That's exactly right. And how do we get away from that? That's the thing. And that's what Romans is talking about. This is our, not rule book, this is our game plan.
Not only that, but they didn't ease into it.
Exactly.
It's like it happened and you're smack.
That's exactly right. It's not something they eased into. Now they're trying to ease into it. You know, they're putting that foot in that cold water, just trying to get a little bit at a time. They were thrown off the bridge into the cold water. They didn't have a chance to acclimate. That's a good word. They did not have the chance to acclimate to this new way. Okay? Now, as
what part of the trouble was, the new way, they had in their mind that made the old way wrong, and they couldn't believe that all their families for decades had been wrong.
exactly right.
It wasn't wrong, it was a change.
It was different. Yeah,
And that's why they had wanted the Gentiles to be circumcised.
that's exactly right.
They wanted to bring some of their
They wanted to carry that metric system over. So, anyhow, they had the circumcision. They had that covenant. So, but Paul brings on this: all have fallen short of God's splendor and glory. Okay, all. We became less than what God desired, despite having been made in His image, and so. What we received as far as justification and was a gift. That's a gift from God. And so, we have no claim to any merit before God. Okay? Nothing we can do can merit God's favor. And so the concept of redemption would have been very important in this culture. What do you guys think of when you hear redemption? Somebody say coupon, because everybody thinks of coupon, right? I'm not a coupon guy, okay? I'm just not. I'm not going to redeem a coupon for something. I just don't. My wife, on the other hand, will just say will, okay? I am willing, if I want something, to pay the price that's asked for it and get out. Okay. And I will. I know. Yeah. It's not that I don't understand the value. It's just not in my nature, I guess. I don't know why, but and I don't know why it never was, and it's just not. But when I read redemption, that's what I see in my mind is coupons. Not the same kind of redemption. It's more like we are the coupon, almost. Being redeemed for the gifts of God. And so the concept of redemption in this Gentile world, so now we've moved over to the Gentile world, would have been a ransom or price paid for a captive or for a prisoner of war to pay his freedom. Okay? That's a whole different thing than a coupon. Okay? This was a life-giving, a life-changing, and a life-receiving concept to the Gentile brethren. Bought with a price. Okay? That's kind of that concept. So, yes?
Back in the olden days during this time and before, the firstborn belonged to God. And if you wanted to buy it back, you had to give
Whatever.
the oxen, the
Yeah,
whatever,
yeah.
to redeem that firstborn back to you.
Back to your family. That's right.
I think that's great.
It is. And that's where the Jewish brethren would have understood redemption. Mark said that back in the day, the firstborn was the property that was dedicated to God. And in order for you to receive your own child back from God, there was a price. There was a redemption to get your child back. So now, we are not, and we are not being saved from Satan. Okay? I thought that was a very interesting statement. Our salvation is not saved from Satan. Okay? We're being saved from the wrath of God. Okay? God saves us from his own wrath.
Yeah, from the punishment we deserve.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And we talked about wrath earlier in Romans. So we were being saved from God's own wrath. So God had his son crucified and displayed this act to the world. He sacrificed his son for all humankind as a propitiation. We like that word, propitiation. Okay? And there's lots of debates over that word too, but to appease someone or take away their anger. Okay, that's propitiation. To appease someone or take away their anger. Okay, and so some would say sacrifice of atonement, but the basic meaning is to appease anger. And we talked about God's wrath and his anger, but God sent Jesus, and Jesus' sacrifice appeased the wrath of God. Okay? That was the only thing that would appease the wrath of God towards his children, and that's what it took. So some like to say expiation. I don't know if that's exactly right, expiation, but just the removing of guilt. Okay? And so appeasing God's anger I don't know that that takes away the guilt. I think Christ's blood washing away the sins removes the guilt, and that appeases God's anger. Does that make sense to anybody but me? Because it's just kind of rumbling around in there. So anyhow, our guilt is removed through the washing of the blood of Christ, and that's the guilt of the world. Now, at one time, and I never considered this until I read this. At one time, the sacrifice for the people was made in the Holy of Holies. Okay? The sacrifice of the people was made in secret. It was made hidden from the view of the people. Jesus' sacrifice was made public. It was offered for all humanity and not just the Jews. So God offered his Son to demonstrate his covenant commitment, his righteousness. He's just and righteous, not just in forgiving the sins through the cross, but in holding back punishment. That has always intrigued me, the change in the way God has dealt with his people. Okay? In God's anger, in the early days, we'll call it the early days, early history in the Jewish nation, his anger was real. And the people would be exiled. Okay? They would have a physical something that was tangible as far as the punishment of God. Okay? They would also have a tangible something they could grasp when they were in God's favor. Okay? Everything would go well. The crops would grow. The sheep would calve, or whatever sheep do. Everything would be, there would be abundance, and there would be health, and there would be all the good things that come from God. And so there was the punishment was a tangible thing. Today we can, in our minds, associate some of the bad things that happen. Society likes to say that, oh, well, this is just a punishment for what you've done, and God is punishing you, or God's wrath is being delved out towards you because of a particular sin or a particular thing. And we find through the scriptures that that's not necessarily the case. And so the covenant commitment and his righteousness and the holding back of punishment, we need to remember that. Okay? Now, law that justifies, and this is where we come to now with the Gentile nation, because the law that the Jewish brethren followed was rules and regulations and days and times and things to draw their mind towards God, to see God, and to stay in or become part of the covenant relationship that they had with God, or a reminder or a remembrance. But now we have the law of faith. And that's something that's not a Jewish-only possession, like the law was, like the Mosaic law. So with the faith, we enter into a covenant, and we live our lives justified before God through the blood of Christ. And faith defines God's people. Okay? Birth no longer defines God's people as far as physical birth. Okay? A name no longer defines God's people. Larry, good morning. Where you live no longer defines God's people. It's faith defines God's people. So, as we go through Romans, and Bob has talked about it, it's a tough book because there's so many things that are so hard to understand from. We have to put ourselves in the Jewish mindset for part of it, as far as how they react to. We have to put ourselves in the Gentile of the day mindset to how they react to. We have to put our minds in both on how they react to each other, and then we have to go as a group how they react to God and His will and being justified through Him. And so we're called to struggle with God's Word and to constantly study. It shouldn't be a surprise to us that we don't understand some things. Okay? There are a lot of things in just everyday life that we don't understand, that don't have the meaning or the impact on our lives that this should have. The time and effort that we put forth to understand how God justifies His people, how He redeems His people, how He set forth the propitiation, how it's trustworthy, and how it's a covenant, and how we can be better, how we can glorify and honor Him, all of those things, those things are on us. Okay, those are not things I can do for you. I tell my kids that a lot. I can't do that for you. Some things you have to do for yourself. When I was teaching the high school class, I told them all the time, I said, just, believe half of what you read, none of what you see, and figure it out for yourself. You have to know I can tell you, somebody asked Albert Einstein or Thomas Edison one time, one of these smart guys, asked him one time, "What's your phone number?" So he went to the phone book and looked up what his phone is. "You don't even know your own phone number? You're one of the smartest men in the world and you don't know your own phone number?" He said, "Well, I don't cloud my mind with things that I can look up, And so we don't need to know we just need to know where to look, okay? We need to know how to look, and we need to know if to look. And so we'll live our lives in a way that there'll be times when we need to know, and then we know where to look. And so and I'm just going to leave it at that. We just need to know where to look. Now, God demanded that a price be paid for man's sins. We know that. He loved us enough to provide the only sacrifice perfect enough to do it. And that's Jesus. So, in Romans 3:27, where's boasting then? Okay, how can I boast in something that God has done for me or given me, allowed me? It's still all from God. It's excluded. That's exactly right. And where it comes from. Okay? Those of you that have kids that have grown up, they come to the realization that you were right. I don't know how that happens. You've been telling them all along that you were right. They should have known that you were right, but they come to their own realization when they have children of their own, when they get into a situation that you've been in yourself. I always told, and I had to tell Brandon more than JT, because JT was pretty much, you just tell him and that's good. Brandon, I had to tell him that just because you can doesn't mean you should. And just because it's legal doesn't mean it's right. Okay? And so, as we go through our lives, even as we go through the study of Romans, it's important to understand the context in which these brethren were coming together. Okay? We've talked about it, but the Jewish brethren are just now coming back, and what they're finding is not what they left. Okay? They left with the imperial system, metric system. No, they left with the other that's not metric, whatever, standard system. They're left with the standard system. They're coming back to the metric system, and it's not easy to accept. Though the Gentile brethren would have been saying, well, it's so much easier. It's just all tens. You know, the metric system is just all tens. It's simple. But the Jewish brethren would be coming back about, well, what about miles per hour and inches and yards and cups and ounces and all the things that we know that are no longer what we know. You know, and so, and there's the second bell. Did you hear that? Okay. Paul is trying to explain that knowledge of sin combined with faith is the essence of the new covenant. This is the part of the law that Paul is talking about. Okay? The law defined sin. Okay? The law defined sin. Faith in the lawmaker allows us to enter the new covenant. And so, faith is the essence. And so, as we go through our lives and as we work on our faith, as we work out our faith, there'll be times when we just don't understand, we don't know, we don't agree. You know, there'll be times that we just don't agree. And because we live we like to justify our actions, and we can justify them with the scriptures if we try hard enough, by either what is said or what is not said. And so we need to be careful of that and work out our salvation, work out our justification in the scriptures with a heart for God and with a faith that he does know what he's doing. That's a difficult time sometimes for us to understand. God does know what he's doing, regardless of what we think. And so, thank you for your time and your patience with me. And we'll see you again next week.